To glimpse inside the mind of someone who's firmly against vaccinations, hear out this book, Melanie's Marvelous Measles. The story follows a girl named Tina, who's never been vaccinated before. After finding out her friend Melanie has measles, Mom tells Tina to play with Melanie. Why? Because contracting measles is good for you. Unfortunately, things don't go as planned, and Tina somehow dodges one of the world's most contagious viruses. Instead, some vaccinated kid ends up catching the disease. Therefore, the moral of the story is that vaccines don't work and measles are good for you. You can take the time to read the reviews yourself. Anyway, while it's easy to write these people off as stupid, that isn't always the case. In some regions, parents with higher levels of education, e.g. college graduates, were actually more likely to refuse vaccinations. So, why then do people fear vaccines? Basically, it boils down to being biased. Maybe they've had a bad experience in the past, or perhaps they're just the type to believe in conspiracy theories. Either way, from then on, they only really take in confirming evidence. In fact, there's probably no chance you'd be able to convert them. This is pretty annoying, given the fact that they're putting everyone's health at risk. So, what can anti-vaxxers possibly be good for? Well, firstly consider the idea that their level of bias isn't too far off from our own. If we were to honestly evaluate ourselves, we'd find similar levels of bias in different areas of life. Only, we're much better at spotting other people's biases than we are at spotting our own. For example, when 661 people were asked how biased they were in comparison to the regular American, only one admitted to being more biased than average. Now, it might be a stretch to say that our level of bias is equal to anti-vaxxers, but it does get close. Let's take a moment to focus on our own personal beliefs. For instance, gay rights. Up until the early 90s, homosexuality was classified as a mental illness by the World Health Organization. Nowadays, the majority of people agree that being gay isn't a disease of the mind. But what if I now showed you 5 studies which all concluded that homosexuality is actually linked to mental illness? How would you respond? Well, one study did exactly this. Researchers gave participants studies which either confirmed or disconfirmed their views on homosexuality. When faced with disconfirming evidence, not surprisingly, participants didn't change their opinion. Instead, they just concluded that science can't be used in this particular case. Perhaps the studies were biased, or maybe mental illnesses aren't something you can measure. This is fair enough. However, the study then asked those people whether science can answer more general questions, e.g., whether spanking your child is effective, or whether a psychic sixth sense exists. Those who previously had been challenged by science were now more likely to conclude that scientific evidence was useless, not just in the case of homosexuality, but for all these general cases too. Now, while the effect isn't nearly as strong, this denial of science sounds similar to the case of anti-vaxxers, right? And here's a more extreme example. Participants were shown the exact same news clip about an Israel versus Palestine conflict and asked whether it was biased. Those who were pro-Israel said the media was being too harsh on Israel. They claimed that for every one good mention of Israel, there was 3.5 bad mentions. Yet, the pro-Palestinians saw the complete opposite. They said the media was being too lenient towards Israel, claiming that each bad mention of Israel was actually balanced out by 1.5 good mentions. This massive distortion of evidence once again parallels the case with anti-vaxxers. Both sides are exposed to the same information and both come out of it with wildly opposing views. Now, imagine getting into examples involving politics. These personal beliefs would only hold stronger biases such that, regardless of whether you're left or right-winged, it's going to be hard to stay impartial during arguments. So ultimately, as much as we'd like to think we're rational, we all suffer from the same biases as anti-vaxxers. This isn't to say we're just as biased as them. However, if there's only one thing anti-vaxxers are good for, it's to remind us what could happen if we don't pause to reflect on our own biases.